The momentum has shifted in favor of Ukraine. Ukrainians see that they are in a much better position now than they were even a few months ago. This is going to get worse and worse for Russia because Ukrainians are going to keep getting better and better with their long-range precision strike. Now it feels like they are increasing the scale of what they're doing, not just the quality. If they can sustain this going towards the end of the year, it will be very, very difficult for the Russians to support their own operations. It's clear, I think, to almost anybody that's watching that the momentum has shifted in favor of Ukraine. You know, it's too early. You can't say, well, this is the turning point or it's the beginning of the end or anything like that, as much as I hope it is. But it really is clear that the momentum has shifted because the Russian ground operations have been stopped. The Russian Navy is barely a factor anymore. Ukraine's long-range missile strikes are wrecking Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. And if they can continue this over the coming weeks, then it will be long-term damage. And then, of course, their mid-range strikes against Russian logistics between Crimea and Rostov are really making it difficult to sustain Russian forces in the southeastern part of Ukraine. And then, of course, we're all watching the gas queues, or the people queuing up for gas, the shortages, Crimea becoming isolated and rendered untenable for Russian forces. These are all positive things. I don't know, and I would not pretend to know, what's in the mind of the average Russian. You know, what comes out of there. You always have to be a little bit skeptical whether it's good or bad. But it does seem that the Russians are in a difficult situation, and they're going to have to make some decisions about where to go next. It's difficult to do more than speculate about what's happening on the inside if you're out in the private sector like I am. I mean, I would certainly hope that our intelligence analysts, both British, American, German, Polish, all of them, the French would be looking very closely at, you know, who's there, what's being done and said behind the scenes. The recent exchange with Lukashenko was very interesting, you know, with Lukashenko feeling that he needed to apologize to Zelensky and then also apparently turning off these devices that were helping Russian drones. You know, if Lukashenko is feeling that he can do some things that in the past he would not have done, you know, that could be an indicator. But there's always a mystery there. There's no journalism to speak of that could provide transparency. So I'm reluctant to say that, yes, of course, he's losing his grip. And he's going to continue the war as long as he thinks he can win. So the key is helping the people around him convince them that there's no way that Russia can win this, and that the damage that he is doing with his war is so bad for Russia that he's got to stop. I don't know that there are enough people that have the courage to be able to do that. You know, he's spent the last many years killing or imprisoning all of his opponents and building up a security apparatus around him that would make him coup-proof. So it's really hard to know for sure what's the mood there. The mill bloggers or influencers, I think most of us have been paying attention to what they say and write as having some sense of what's going on, but you can never be sure how many of those are legitimate. I think the videos of these, particularly women that are down in Crimea and other places that are crying because their vacation's been ruined, I don't think any of us have any sympathy for them. Lukashenko has mastered the art of sitting on the fence, of playing both sides of staying in power, doing enough so that Putin didn't automatically just attack and take it over. And of course, he's dealing with a pretty, I would say, fragile situation of his own inside Belarus. So trying to stay in power there. But this thing about, him apologizing to President Zelensky was interesting, because now he's not picking a side, but he's acknowledging President Zelensky as a head of government, and this is interesting. And now, of course, part of this could all be part of theater that's designed to move things along. I think Ukrainians see that they are in a much better position now than they were even a few months ago, and this is going to get worse and worse for Russia as the summer goes along, because Ukrainians are going to keep getting better and better with their long-range precision strike against oil and gas infrastructure, against Russian defense industry, and Lukashenko probably sees he wants to be on the correct side, as this goes along, which means he is less certain about Russian victory, and maybe even Russian retribution. I don't know. Well, I think it depends a little bit on Ukraine's ability to continue to grow the size of their own industry and to increase production. They've always had such good technology, and they've been in front of everybody, but they've not been able to get to scale the numbers needed to really start changing things. Now it feels like they are increasing the scale of what they're doing, not just the quality. So I think if they can sustain this, going towards the end of the year, it will be very, very difficult for the Russians to support their own operations. I mean, this is not about gasoline for people on holiday in Crimea. It's about, the fuel needed for trucks and trains and for aircraft and all the stuff needed to sustain Russian operations. I think that becomes very difficult. And then, of course, the impact on their own population. People are starting to wonder what the hell's going on, and they either get really mad and do something about it, or they put pressure on the government to stop. This fairy tale about Russians being able to suffer better than anybody, I think that's an absolute fairy tale. The fact is, nobody. None of the oligarchs are suffering. Nobody, most of the upper class in Moscow and St. Petersburg, they're not going to suffer. These are, all these videos of people crying because their holiday's been ruined. So I think they're as spoiled as anybody else. The 90% that are not in the upper class or even the upper middle class, they're good at suffering because they've never had it any better. It's not like, people in Mayfair all of a sudden had to do without, they had to do without things. Okay, there's some people that almost never had anything good. So I would, people that are counting on the Russian people being able to just endure more and more and more, I think are misreading the actual situation there. And I think Ukraine is being smart by not attacking residential areas, doing the same illegal attacks against civilian infrastructure the way that the Russians have done. They're using their capabilities to strike targets that affect the battlefield and affect Russia's ability to continue the war. So if you're going after oil and gas infrastructure, it reduces Russia's ability to generate income to their customers in China and India and elsewhere. So this is very good strategic targeting now that they have the capability to do this. And then, of course, going after the factories, as we've seen the last few days, that produce components necessary for ballistic missiles. This is the equivalent of killing the archer rather than trying to shoot down all the Russian missiles. So these are proper targets for Ukrainian military to strike. Now, of course, Russians civilians can see that when they see the huge refinery outside of Moscow on fire, and the whole city has got black smoke over it. That it's there for everyone to see, so that they realize that not only is Vladimir Putin unable to protect Russia's key assets, the war is coming home to them without having to waste drones or missiles against residential areas that will accomplish nothing except harden people, piss them off. So I think what will really be interesting to watch is whether or not the Kremlin thinks that they have to mobilize the population of Moscow or St. Petersburg. If all the privileged young people all of a sudden find themselves putting on that green uniform of the Russian army, then enthusiasm will really drop for support of this war, is my guess. I would say it's definitely not the time for Ukraine to take their foot off the gas pedal when it comes to Crimea. I mean, now really continue pouring it on, and frankly, all of us in the West should be supporting them in this, helping Ukraine isolate Crimea by knocking out the bridges, the ferries, all of the different ways to get in and out of there, and then making that place unusable for the Russian forces. So airfields, air defense systems, logistics sites, the various naval facilities that are still there, these things have to be targeted relentlessly so that Russia cannot use Crimea as a launching pad for operations or support for operations. And it looks to me that that's what they are doing. Now, I was criticized in the past, and correctly so, for being too optimistic about what was going to happen with Crimea, thinking it was going to happen much sooner. I really did think it was, because I was so sure that the U.S. and U.K. and other countries were going to really provide the stuff that Ukraine needed. And so I was wrong in that assessment, and we did not support Ukraine as we should. So here we are. Now Ukraine, without too much help from us, is doing this on their own. And I think they also clearly are not being restricted by anybody else about, or at least they're ignoring it, about whether or not they could attack targets, deep inside of Russia or Crimea. I think in the past there were people that would urge them not to do this. I'm glad that is either stopped or they're just not paying attention to it. And so they're able to strike with frequency needed to really damage the infrastructure in and around Crimea. Now, at what point do the Russians say, okay, we're out of here? That's going to be more difficult. But I think when you combine the strategic effect of destruction of oil and gas infrastructure, and Russia cannot pay for this anymore, and the operational level destruction of the logistics infrastructure, then I think at some point the Russians will be seriously considering stopping this. They can't. I don't think they'll be able to sustain it at this sort of level deep into next year.